In this story, we'll step back in time to the dusty plains of the American West, sometime in the 1870s. It's not the story of a famous gunslinger, an outlaw, or a sheriff. It's the story of an ordinary man, a worker named Eli Carter, who wakes before sunrise every day to earn a living in a small frontier town called Dust Creek. You'll walk with him through the biting morning cold, smell the smoke of black coffee brewing on an open flame, and hear the echo of pickaxes in the nearby quarry. You'll see how life was built not by legends, but by quiet, tireless people whose names never appeared in history books. By the end of this story, you'll understand what it truly meant to survive and dream on the Wild West, not through gunfights or gold rush glory, but through sweat, grit, and a hope that tomorrow might be just a little better. So, close your eyes. The sun is rising over the dry red hills, and Eli's day is about to begin. The first light of dawn crept across the horizon, painting the desert sky in shades of pale gold and rust. A cold wind swept through the wooden walls of Eli Carter's shack, whistling like an old ghost. He stirred in his cot, pulling the thin blanket closer before finally sitting up. The floorboards creaked beneath his calloused feet. Eli wasn't a rich man, not even close. His home was one room with a small stove, a table, and a tin cup that had lost most of its shine years ago. But he had something more valuable than comfort: routine. In Dust Creek, routine meant survival. He lit the small stove with trembling fingers and poured the last of his coffee grounds into a pot. The smell filled the air, bitter, burnt, but enough to wake the senses. Outside, the sound of hooves echoed faintly, the mail rider heading out early. The town was still asleep, but soon it would come alive with the noise of wagons, blacksmith hammers, and shouting foremen. Eli sipped his coffee, staring at a small, crumpled photograph pinned to the wall, a woman and a child. His wife and son. They were hundreds of miles away in Missouri, waiting for him to save enough money to bring them west. He promised he would. He always promised. He put on his worn boots, tied a red bandana around his neck, and stepped outside. The air was sharp with the smell of dust and sage. To the east, the sky was bleeding into orange. The quarry lay 2 miles outside town, past the dry riverbed and the windmill that never worked. Eli joined a few other men walking in silence, silhouettes in the morning haze. They didn't talk much. There wasn't much to say. Work was hard, and words were best saved for after sunset. By the time the sun rose, they were already swinging pickaxes. The stone was tough, heavy limestone used for building rail bridges. Every strike sent a shower of dust into the air, coating faces, hair, and clothes in a pale film. The foreman, a thick man with a mustache and a voice like gravel, shouted from above, "Faster, boys! We've got a shipment coming by sundown." Eli grunted, wiped sweat from his brow, and kept swinging. Each hit sent pain shooting up his arms, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. The pay was $2 a day, enough for food, rent, and maybe a letter home. By noon, the sun burned mercilessly overhead. The men gathered under a half-built wooden shelter to eat. Bread, jerky, and a sip of water. Flies buzzed lazily around them. One of the younger workers, Tom, a freckled kid barely 20, leaned over and said, "You think they'll ever finish that railroad, Eli?" Eli smirked faintly. "They'll finish it long after we're bones in the dirt." The men laughed quietly, the kind of laugh that wasn't joy, but survival. When the lunch break ended, they returned to work. The rhythm of picks and shovels filled the canyon, blending with the distant cry of a hawk. Hours blurred into one another, and Eli's mind wandered to his wife's voice, his son's laughter, and the thought of a small farm where he wouldn't have to swing a pick ever again. By evening, the foreman blew the whistle. The men dropped their tools, muscles trembling. Another day done. As they trudged back to town, the sun dipped low, turning the sky blood red. Dust Creek looked almost peaceful in that light. Smoke rising from chimneys, a piano playing softly in the saloon, children running barefoot along the street. Eli stopped by the general store, bought a loaf of bread and a tin of beans, and started the long walk home. When he reached his cabin, the horizon was already swallowing the last traces of daylight. He lit a lantern, ate in silence, then opened his small notebook, one he used to write letters he couldn't afford to send. "Dear Mary," he wrote slowly, "another day in Dust Creek. The quarry's hard, but the men are good. I miss you both every hour. He paused, the pen shaking slightly. Maybe by spring, I'll have enough to bring you here. Maybe. He stared at the flame of the lantern, eyes heavy. Outside, the coyotes howled under a moon as pale as bone. Tomorrow would be the same. Another sunrise, another shift, another promise whispered into the dark. But for now, Eli allowed himself one small comfort, the dream of a better day. He lay back, closed his eyes, and the world slowly faded to silence. The night in Dust Creek came slowly, crawling over the desert like a dark tide. The last glow of sunlight clung to the horizon, painting the sand in muted shades of copper and violet. Eli sat outside his cabin, his back against the wooden wall, a small lantern flickering beside him. He could still taste the dust from the quarry on his lips. The air was cool now, almost kind, and for the first time all day, the wind felt like a friend. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, lonely, hollow. The town was quieter than usual. Even the saloon, with its usual laughter and piano music, seemed subdued. Perhaps everyone was simply tired of another endless day. Eli took out the small notebook again, tracing his fingers over the worn cover. He thought about sending one of those letters for real this time. Maybe tomorrow, maybe when the next mail wagon passed through. But paper and postage cost more than he could easily spare, and hope had its own price. He leaned back and looked at the stars. Out here, they were countless, bright and sharp, like the points of broken glass scattered across the sky. Some men believed each one was a soul, a spirit watching over the living. Eli didn't know what to believe, but he liked the idea that someone was watching him. Just then, a sound broke the silence, hooves pounding fast against the hard earth. A rider emerged from the darkness, his silhouette cutting through the moonlight. The horse was lathered in sweat, foam at its mouth. The rider pulled up hard near the saloon, dismounted, and stumbled inside. Curiosity got the better of Eli. He stood, brushed the dust off his pants, and walked toward town. The wooden boards of the street echoed under his boots. Inside the saloon, voices were raised, urgent, tense. The piano had stopped playing. A few men stood around the rider, who was slumped over the counter, breathing hard. Train from Silver Creek, the man gasped. Robbed, out near Red Ridge. They say the gang's heading this way. The room went silent. Robbery wasn't uncommon on the frontier, but Red Ridge was close, too close. Eli felt a chill crawl down his neck. The sheriff, a lean man with gray in his beard, spat his tobacco and said quietly, "All right, boys. No need for panic. Just keep your rifles close and your doors locked." His calm tone didn't fool anyone. Everyone in Dust Creek knew what happened when outlaws rode through. Trouble, and plenty of it. Eli returned to his cabin with the news echoing in his head. He checked the door latch twice before sitting back down. The lantern cast long shadows on the wall, flickering like restless spirits. He couldn't sleep. The image of the bandits, the thought of gunfire under the moonlight, it all stirred something old and uneasy in him. Before the quarry, before Dust Creek, Eli had seen violence. He'd fought in the war, carried a rifle, and buried more friends than he could count. That was years ago, but some memories never aged. He had sworn never to pick up a gun again, only a pickaxe, only honest work. But the West had a way of testing men's promises. He reached under his bed and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside, wrapped in an oilcloth, lay a Colt revolver, dull with age, but still functional. He stared at it for a long time. His reflection wavered in the metal. Finally, he closed the box and pushed it away. Not tonight, he thought. Not unless there's no choice. When morning came, Dust Creek felt different. The men at the quarry spoke in whispers, glancing at the hills. Even the foreman seemed quieter than usual. Every sound carried weight, the crack of rock, the whistle of wind through the canyons. Fear had settled over the town like fine dust, impossible to shake off. At midday, the sheriff rode out with 3 deputies to scout the road to Red Ridge. The rest of the town waited in uneasy silence. Eli tried to work, but his thoughts kept drifting. He pictured Mary and his boy again, safe in Missouri, far from this wild land. What would they think of the life he was living? The risk, the emptiness, the endless waiting. By sunset, the riders returned. The sheriff dismounted slowly, his face set in stone. "They're gone," he said simply. "Turned north. Must have changed course during the night." A collective sigh went through the crowd. For the first time in 2 days, Dust Creek breathed again. That evening, The saloon came back to life. Laughter returned. The piano played its weary tune, and the scent of whiskey filled the air. Eli sat by the window, nursing a single drink. The fear had passed, but something had changed inside him. He realized how fragile this life was, how quickly everything could end. He walked home under a pale moon, thinking about that small farm he dreamed of, about his family, about how many tomorrows he might still have. In the quiet, he whispered to himself, "Just one more season, Mary. Just one more season, and I'll come home." That night, as he lay in bed, the coyotes sang again. But this time, their cries sounded less lonely, almost like a song of endurance, of men and beasts alike, surviving another day on the wild frontier. And somewhere between exhaustion and dream, Eli smiled. Tomorrow would be another sunrise, another battle against dust and time. But for now, he had peace, the kind of working man earns not from glory, but from grit and the quiet pride of simply enduring. The morning sun rose red and heavy, veiled behind a wall of haze. The air felt strange, electric, as if the sky itself held its breath. The men at the quarry worked slower than usual. Even the foreman's shouts lacked their usual bite. Eli sensed it too. That thick, humming silence that came before something fierce. By noon, the wind began to change. It came from the west now, sharp and dry, whipping the dust into swirling ghosts. The horizon darkened, and the desert birds vanished. Eli paused mid-swing, leaning on his pickaxe, staring at the rolling clouds gathering like a black army. The other men followed his gaze. Nobody spoke. The storm came fast. Within minutes, the sky split open with thunder. Sheets of rain lashed the earth, turning the dry sand into thick mud. The quarry floor became a pit of water and rock. Men ran for the wagons, for the cliffs, for any cover they could find. Eli grabbed a rope and helped Tom secure the tool crates before the wind tore them away. "Get down, Eli!" Tom shouted over the roar. A gust hit them like a hammer. The two men stumbled toward a low ridge, diving behind the rocks. Dust and water filled the air, a choking, blinding storm that swallowed everything. The sound was deafening, the world reduced to chaos and grit. For an hour, the storm raged. Lightning clawed across the sky, illuminating the terrified horses and collapsed scaffolds. Eli pressed his back against the stone, rain cutting through his clothes, cold as ice. He thought of Mary and his son. What they'd say if they saw him now, fighting the wrath of nature itself for $2 a day. When the storm finally passed, Dust Creek was unrecognizable. The road had washed away, roofs torn apart, fences scattered like matchsticks. The quarry was half flooded, tools buried under mud and stone. The men emerged slowly, coughing, covered in dirt and disbelief. The silence that followed was worse than the thunder. Eli walked back to town with the others, boots sinking into the wet earth. The saloon's windows were shattered, and the church bell lay half buried near the steps. The whole town looked beaten but alive, like an old boxer still standing after the final round. That night, the townsfolk gathered to count the losses. The blacksmith's barn was gone. The store roof had caved in. A wagon had been swept into the riverbed. Yet somehow, no one had died. It was a miracle, they said. Eli just nodded quietly, grateful but drained. He returned to his cabin, soaked and trembling. He lit a small fire, though the wood hissed and smoked from the damp. The heat felt weak, but it was enough. He peeled off his wet shirt and hung it near the stove. For the first time in a long while, he felt small, a speck beneath the vast, untamable sky. The West had reminded him who was truly in control. When morning came, Dust Creek glittered under a pale blue sky. The storm had left behind a strange calm, almost holy. The air smelled of wet earth and pine sap. Eli stepped outside, the ground soft beneath his boots, and for a moment, it felt like the world had been washed clean. Then he saw the rider. A mail wagon was limping down the road. One wheel cracked, its driver splattered with mud. The man waved weakly as he passed. "Mail from Silver Creek," he shouted. Got lucky the bridge held. Eli raised his hand, half in greeting, half in disbelief. Mail had been delayed for weeks, and now, after the storm, it had somehow arrived. At the post station, a small crowd gathered. The clerk, a thin man with glasses always slipping down his nose, sorted through the soggy envelopes. When he called Eli's name, the worker froze. It had been months since he'd received anything. The letter was wrinkled, water-stained, but still sealed. The handwriting, familiar. He carried it home like something fragile, precious. Sitting by the stove, he broke the seal carefully and unfolded the damp paper. The first line hit him like a hammer. "Dear Eli, we miss you every day." Mary's words poured out about the harvest, about their boy learning to read, about how she still believed in his promise to return. She said she'd saved every coin he sent and dreamed of the day they'd live under the same roof again. And then, at the bottom, "I believe you'll come home before next winter." "I just know it." Eli's throat tightened. He could almost hear her voice, soft and steady. The firelight danced on the page, turning the ink into gold. For a moment, the years of dust and labor melted away. He wasn't a quarry worker or a wanderer. He was a husband, a father, a man with something to go back to. He folded the letter gently, pressed it to his chest, and closed his eyes. The storm outside had passed, but another had begun within him. The storm of longing, of hope, of guilt for staying so long away. Yet within that turmoil, a promise glimmered like sunlight on wet stone. He would make it home. That night, Dust Creek slept under a sky scrubbed clean by rain. The stars shone brighter than ever, as if the heavens themselves approved. Eli lay awake, listening to the soft drip of water from the eaves, thinking of Mary's last line again and again. "Before next winter," he whispered it to the dark, like a vow. "I'll make it, Mary. I swear it." Outside, the desert wind carried his words away, out beyond the hills, past the broken fences, into the endless wild. And somewhere far to the east, perhaps, a woman stirred in her sleep, smiling faintly, as if she had heard him. Eli woke before dawn, though sleep had barely touched him. The letter still rested on the table beside the oil lamp, folded with a care he reserved for sacred things. He stared at it through the dim light, the faint scent of smoke and damp paper lingering in the air. Every word from Mary echoed in his head, gentle and unrelenting as rain. He brewed his coffee slow, letting the sound of boiling water fill the silence. Outside, Dust Creek was stirring to life. The storm had left deep scars, broken fences, uprooted trees, and a wagon still half buried in mud. Yet the town endured, just as it always did. Eli sipped from his cup, eyes fixed on the horizon painted silver by morning light. When he reached the quarry, the men greeted him with tired smiles. The storm had changed everyone, even the foreman. There were fewer shouts now, more quiet nods, more understanding. Work resumed, though slower, with hands that still trembled from what they had seen. For the first time in months, Eli didn't feel alone among them. They all carried something invisible: loss, fear, or hope. At midday, he set his tools down and unfolded the letter again, smoothing the creases. The words had dried stiff, the ink slightly blurred by rain. He read each line as if it were scripture: Mary's talk of the harvest, the boy's drawings, her faith in his return. He imagined their small farmhouse, the cracked porch, the sound of wind in the corn, the smell of home. Tom walked over, wiping his brow with a rag. "That from back home?" he asked. Eli nodded. "From Missouri." Tom smiled faintly. "My folks are in Kansas. Haven't heard from them since spring. Storms tore half the telegraph lines." "You're lucky." Eli hesitated, then offered the young man a look that mixed gratitude and sorrow. "Luck's a strange thing, Tom. Comes and goes like rain." When the whistle blew, they packed up for the day. The road back to town shimmered under the setting sun, puddles reflecting the orange sky. Eli felt the letter against his chest, warm through the fabric of his shirt. Each step felt lighter, though he still carried the weight of distance, the cruel measure between where he was and where he longed to be. At the saloon, the piano was playing again, though softer than before. The storm had humbled the place. Men spoke quieter, laughed less, drank slower. Eli sat in the corner, turning the empty glass in his hands. Across the room, the sheriff discussed repairs with the blacksmith. Everyone was rebuilding something: walls, roofs, or the pieces of themselves. He left early, stepping into the cool night. The stars were back in full glory, sharp and endless. The letter seemed to hum against his heart, alive with purpose. For years, he told himself that working here was temporary, that every sunrise brought him closer to home. But for the first time, he truly believed it. Mary's words had given shape to his promise. Back in his cabin, Eli spread a blank page beside the letter. The pen scratched slowly across the paper. "My dearest Mary," he wrote, "your words reached me after a storm. Maybe it was meant to be that way. The rain clearing the air so I could see clearer." He paused, the flame flickering over his face. "You said you believe I'll come home before next winter." "I will." He described the storm, the town, the quarry, but only lightly, as if to protect her from the roughness of his days. He told her about Tom, about the way the men had stood together when the wind howled. "They're good people," he wrote. "Rough hands, soft hearts. I'm proud to call them brothers." His handwriting trembled, but his resolve did not. When he finished, he folded the letter neatly, sealing it with a drop of wax from the candle. The post would leave in 2 days. It wasn't much, but it was something to look forward to. The thought of his words crossing the miles, reaching the woman who still believed in him. That belief was worth more than gold. He sat back, listening to the faint creak of the windmill outside. The night was alive with the sounds of frogs and distant coyotes. Life, fragile yet persistent. He thought of his son again, the boy learning to read by firelight, tracing letters that spelled his father's name. A lump rose in Eli's throat. He whispered, "Soon, boy, soon." The days that followed carried a new rhythm. The quarry felt less like a prison and more like a bridge, a place that would eventually lead him home. Each strike of his pickaxe sounded like a heartbeat, each drop of sweat a coin in the bank of his promise. Dust Creek still bore scars, but Eli had begun to heal his own. At sunset one evening, as he sat watching the sky burn to gold, Tom joined him with 2 tin cups. "Heard your letter's off tomorrow," he said. Eli nodded. "Feels good, don't it?" Tom smiled, staring out at the horizon. "Yeah, makes this place feel smaller somehow." Eli chuckled softly. "Maybe not smaller, Tom. Just less lonely." That night, sleep came easier. The future, though uncertain, no longer felt distant. The letter from Missouri had done more than remind him of home. It had given him direction. And as the desert wind brushed softly against the windows, Eli Carter dreamed not of survival, but of return. The sun was sinking low, washing Dust Creek in a tired shade of amber. Work had ended early. The foreman wanted time to fix the collapsed scaffold before tomorrow. Eli walked the long road home, his boots sinking into soft earth, the weight of the day clinging to his shoulders. The letter from Mary still rested safely in his coat, folded like a prayer. He paused near the ridge where the storm had torn down an old oak. The air was heavy with the smell of wet wood and sage. As he adjusted the strap of his satchel, a distant sound caught his ear, faint, uneven hoofbeats. He turned toward the horizon, where a single horse was struggling through the fading light. Something about its gait was wrong. The rider slumped in the saddle, head bowed. As the horse drew nearer, Eli saw the dark stain spreading down the man's shirt. Blood. The animal stopped a few yards away, snorting and trembling. The rider barely managed a whisper before falling to the ground. "Help, please." His voice was hoarse, cracked by thirst and pain. Eli knelt beside him, checking for life. The man was breathing, shallow but steady. A bullet wound in the shoulder. Not fresh, maybe a day old. His clothes were torn, his beard unshaven, eyes wild with fever. Beside him, a small leather pouch lay half buried in the mud. Eli hesitated before picking it up, weighing it in his hand. It was heavier than it looked. Inside, wrapped in cloth, was a handful of silver coins, more money than Eli had seen in months. He looked back at the man, who was drifting in and out of consciousness. "You robbed someone," Eli muttered under his breath. The man stirred faintly, his eyes flickering open. "Didn't mean to," he rasped. "Just ran." Then he collapsed again. Eli stood there for a long moment, torn between sense and mercy. The sheriff's words from weeks ago echoed in his mind, the gang that robbed the train near Red Ridge. Could this be one of them? If he brought the man to town, there'd be a reward. Enough to send for Mary and the boy. But if he was wrong, if this man was just a desperate soul, it would haunt him. He sighed and lifted the stranger with effort, draping his arm over his shoulders. The horse followed, hooves squelching softly through the mud. By the time they reached Eli's cabin, the sky had darkened to deep purple. He laid the man on his cot, tore strips of cloth from an old shirt, and began cleaning the wound. "You're either a fool or a fighter," he muttered. "Let's hope it's the second." The man moaned but didn't wake. Eli poured water over the wound, the blood mixing with the dirt on the floor. He stitched it as best he could. Rough work, but enough to hold. When he finished, he covered the stranger with a blanket and sat by the fire. The pouch of silver lay on the table between them, gleaming faintly in the firelight. Hours passed. Outside, the night was restless, wind whispering through the cracks in the walls. Eli couldn't sleep. His thoughts kept circling back to the coins, to Mary's letter, to the promise he'd made. The weight of choice pressed heavy on his chest. In this land, right and wrong often shared the same face. It depended on who lived to tell the story. Near midnight, the stranger stirred. Where am I?" he croaked. Eli leaned forward. "Dust Creek. You're safe for now." The man's eyes darted to the pouch. "You didn't take it?" Eli frowned. "Didn't earn it." A ghost of a smile crossed the stranger's lips. "Then you're one of the last honest men out here." He coughed, wincing. "Name's Mason." Eli poured him a cup of water. "Don't talk too much. You'll tear the stitches." Mason drank slowly, eyes studying the room. "You got family?" he asked after a pause. "Back east," Eli said quietly. "Missouri." Mason nodded weakly. "Then you should go. Don't end up like me, running from things that don't die." His gaze drifted to the fire. Haunted. By morning, Mason was breathing easier, though pale as ash. Eli stepped outside to fetch water and saw the sheriff's horse tied near the saloon in the distance. His stomach knotted. Should he tell him? Should he trade a man's life for a future he'd promised to his family? The sun rose slow and cold, offering no answers. When Eli returned, Mason was awake, sitting up on the cot, staring at the door. "You think you're turning me in?" His voice was calm, almost resigned. Eli hesitated. "You tell me, should I?" Mason gave a weak laugh. "If you don't, someone else will. Sheriff's been looking for me since Silver Creek." His eyes softened. "But I didn't shoot anyone. I just took the wrong road." Eli studied him, weighing the truth in his voice. The man didn't look like a killer, just a man beaten down by the same world they all lived in. "You can rest here a day," Eli finally said. "After that, you move on. No trouble, no guns." Mason nodded. "Fair deal." He leaned back, relief in his face. "You're a good man, Carter. Don't let this land turn you otherwise." That night, while Mason slept, Eli sat by the window, watching the desert fade into darkness. The letter from Mary lay open beside the silver pouch. 2 lives, 2 choices, side by side. He could sell his conscience for comfort, or keep his soul clean and wait for a harder road home. Somewhere deep inside, he already knew his answer. He folded the letter carefully, set it on the table, and whispered to the quiet room, "I'll get home the right way, Mary." No blood on my hands. The wind outside rose, brushing against the walls like a sigh. In Dust Creek, morning was always a few hours away, and with it, another test waiting for a man like Eli Carter. The morning was unusually quiet. Dust Creek seemed suspended, holding its breath. Birds circled cautiously above the rooftops, and even the wind whispered through the streets instead of rattling the boards. Eli sensed something wrong long before the sound of hooves reached his ears, a tension coiling in his stomach that no morning coffee could settle. From the east, a cloud of dust rose along the main road. Figures emerged, mounted and fast, guns glinting in the early light. Eli recognized the posture of outlaws immediately. Rough silhouettes, the kind that had terrorized the rails and ambushed travelers. His heart sank. Mason had warned him, yet he had hoped the man's past would stay hidden. Eli ran to the cabin, grabbing his revolver from beneath the cot. The metal felt cold and heavy in his hand. His palms were steady despite the fear, a reflex of years long past. He peered out through the window, counting 5 men, all wearing the same grim expressions, horses straining against the dust. Each one carried a promise of chaos. The outlaws entered the town like a storm, boots thudding against the wooden streets. Windows slammed as townsfolk ran for cover. The saloon doors banged, spilling chairs into the road. Eli ducked behind his own doorframe, the revolver aimed but his mind racing. He had promised Mary he would not shed blood unless absolutely necessary. Today, that promise would be tested. Mason stepped out from the cabin, limping but steady. Eli hissed at him to stay back. One of the outlaws spotted Mason and shouted, pointing, "There he is!" The one from Silver Creek. The group spurred their horses forward, guns drawn. Eli's throat tightened. He knew that if Mason was taken, their lives would be forfeit, and the reward would vanish into someone else's greedy hands. Eli, Mason whispered, urgency in his eyes. Do something. Eli glanced at him, weighing the cost. The choice was simple in its clarity, devastating in its consequence. Act to protect the innocent or stand aside and hope the town survives. He swallowed hard, knuckles white on the revolver. The first shot rang out, echoing against the canyon walls beyond town. A horse stumbled, its rider thrown violently into the dirt. Screams rose from the saloon. Eli's ears roared with adrenaline. He aimed carefully, fired once, the bullet catching an outlaw by the shoulder. Pain and chaos erupted, but the man was alive, screaming and disoriented. More shots followed. Dust Creek became a battlefield of smoke, mud, and panic. Eli moved with a practiced precision, each shot defensive, calculated. He did not seek blood, only protection, Mason, the town, and the promise of returning home. His heart pounded like a drum, each beat a reminder that one misstep could mean death. Mason ducked behind a barrel, firing a small pistol with surprising skill despite his injury. Eli shouted instructions over the din, guiding the frightened townsfolk to barricade doors and huddle out of sight. Every choice was a gamble. Every breath could be the last. Yet through fear and chaos, he felt a grim determination. The skirmish lasted only minutes, though it seemed endless. By the time the outlaws realized the town would not submit easily, they began retreating, dragging wounded companions away. Dust and smoke settled over the streets, mingling with the smell of gunpowder and mud. Silence returned, broken only by groans and whispered prayers. Eli lowered the revolver, sweat and grime streaking his face. He looked around at Dust Creek. Broken doors, shattered windows, terrified but alive townsfolk. Mason leaned against the wall, breathing heavily, the pallor of pain still on his face. You did good, Mason said softly, voice shaky. You kept them alive. The foreman emerged, dusting himself off, nodding silently at Eli. No words were needed. The town had survived, but Eli felt the weight of his actions settling into his chest. Blood had been shed, even if only defensive, and the desert carried its memory in the mud, the scorched boards, the wounded horses. That night, Eli could not sleep. He replayed every choice, every shot, every fear. His hands shook despite the warmth of the fire. He thought of Mary, of the promise to return without blood on his hands. That promise had been compromised, but it had also saved lives. The moral cost weighed heavy, yet necessity had dictated the path. He finally sat by the window, revolver beside him, staring at the pale stars above. Dust Creek was quiet once more, though the echoes of gunfire lingered like ghosts. Eli knew the frontier demanded harsh decisions, but he also understood that courage was not absence of fear. It was action in its presence. He whispered to the night, almost a prayer. I did what I had to do. Keep me strong, Mary. Keep me true. Outside, the wind carried the words away into the vast desert. In that moment, Eli Carter realized survival came not from avoiding danger, but from confronting it and choosing the right way, even when the path was soaked with peril. The morning after the battle came with an uneasy calm. Dust Creek lay quiet, its streets scarred by yesterday's chaos. Broken windows, splintered doors, and churned-up mud reminded everyone that survival had come at a cost. Eli walked slowly through the town, boots sinking slightly into wet earth, noting each mark left by the outlaw's presence. Mason had been moved to the back room of the saloon, bandaged and resting. Eli checked on him, silently proud of the man's resilience. They exchanged few words. Words could not capture what had occurred. Each glance, each nod, carried the weight of mutual survival, an unspoken acknowledgement that they had faced something beyond ordinary life. The townsfolk emerged cautiously, assessing the damage. Children peered from behind doors, eyes wide with the memory of gunfire. The baker cleaned shattered bread crates, while the blacksmith examined a bent wagon wheel. Dust Creek had survived, but it would take days, even weeks, to repair the physical and emotional scars left by the assault. Eli found himself drawn back to the ruins of the old oak, where the storm had struck weeks before. He touched the rough bark with calloused fingers, thinking of Mary and their boy. The events of the past days had hardened him in some ways but softened his focus on what truly mattered: family, survival, and maintaining the integrity of his own choices. He visited the foreman at the partially repaired quarry. Together, they inspected the broken scaffolding, determining which parts could be salvaged. Each swing of hammer and chisel seemed lighter than before, as if labor itself was a way of reclaiming control over a world that had threatened to spin into chaos. The town depended on hands like theirs. By midday, Eli returned to his cabin, exhausted but reflective. The letter from Mary still lay in its usual place, a beacon of hope and purpose. He read it again, tracing the words with his finger. Her faith in him, unwavering despite distance and danger, reminded him why he endured each day, why he risked himself for others. It was a tether to a life beyond Dust Creek. In the afternoon, Mason stirred, finally able to speak. "I owe you my life," he whispered, voice strained. Eli shook his head. "You'll have to earn it back," he said lightly, though the weight of the ordeal lingered between them. They shared a quiet laugh, a rare sound in a town recently bathed in fear, both understanding that camaraderie was forged in hardship. The sun sank low, casting long shadows over the ruined streets. Eli stepped outside, watching townsfolk rebuild as best they could. Men hammered, women cleaned, and children carried water or small tools. Dust Creek had survived, not because it was strong, but because its people refused to give in to despair. Eli's heart swelled with quiet admiration for their resilience. That night, Eli sat by the fire, revolver laid carefully aside. Thoughts of yesterday's battle drifted through his mind, each choice replayed, each shot measured against morality and necessity. He knew violence had been required, yet he wrestled with guilt and the responsibility of wielding life and death in his hands. He closed his eyes, listening to the creak of the cabin, the distant howl of coyotes, and the soft murmur of Dust Creek settling for the night. Life here was fragile, precarious, but it endured. Each heartbeat felt like a promise, to Mason, to Mary, to himself, that he would continue to face what the frontier demanded without losing who he was. Eli finally leaned back, letting exhaustion claim him, though his mind lingered on possibilities. Could he leave soon? Should he wait until Dust Creek fully recovered? The letter reminded him that time was both precious and fleeting. Every day he survived brought him closer to home, closer to the family he longed to hold once more. Outside, the stars glittered over the desert, sharp and constant. The wind whispered over broken fences and half-rebuilt structures, carrying a reminder that life moved forward, even after chaos. Eli Carter understood that survival was not just about fighting or enduring storms. It was about navigating the aftermath with integrity and heart. By dawn, he resolved to continue his work with renewed purpose. Each strike of hammer and pick, each careful step, each decision to help others over taking advantage of them, was part of a larger plan. Dust Creek had survived the outlaws, the storm, and human frailty. Eli would survive too, and with each day, the promise of Missouri grew brighter in his mind. The morning air carried the scent of iron and smoke. Dust Creek had changed overnight, though the change had been building for months. Men spoke in hurried tones about the distant whistle of a train, a machine that promised new roads, new jobs, and new dangers. Eli stood at the edge of town, watching the horizon glint with metal tracks catching the sun. The workers laid the last rails with precision, their hands raw from weeks of labor. Horses clopped along beside the wagons, carrying timber and tools. Dust Creek's quiet streets, once defined by simple wooden buildings and horse-drawn carts, now buzzed with anticipation. The sound of hammers against steel replaced the distant cry of coyotes. By midday, the first locomotive appeared, puffing smoke like a living beast. Its whistle split the air, startling birds and men alike. Townsfolk gathered along the road, eyes wide with awe and apprehension. Eli felt his heart thrum, the promise of progress, but also the threat of change. This iron serpent would bring wealth, strangers, and a new kind of chaos. The train slowed near the station, releasing a cloud of steam that stung eyes and throat. Workers and merchants crowded around, inspecting each car, imagining opportunities. Some spoke of goods and gold, others of gambling and vice. Eli watched silently, thinking of Mary, of Missouri, and the life he hoped to reclaim. The railroad was a bridge to the future, but which side would he choose? Mason hobbled alongside him, still recovering but eager to witness the spectacle. "Never thought I'd see this," he said, shading his eyes against the sun. Eli nodded. Neither did I, but it's here now. Both men remained quiet, aware that change, though promising, demanded vigilance. Dust Creek's fragile peace could be disrupted in an instant. As the train unloaded, strangers poured into town. Merchants with heavy wagons, prospectors with dreams, and gamblers with sly grins spread through the streets. The saloon buzzed with opportunity and tension alike. Eli felt a mix of excitement and unease. The West was growing faster than he could measure, and Dust Creek was no longer a quiet outpost but a crossroads of ambition. By evening, Eli walked along the newly built tracks, listening to the distant whistle fade into the hills. The landscape was altered, scarred by rails and ties, yet alive with energy. He touched the steel, feeling its cold, unyielding strength, a symbol of both progress and inevitability. For a man like him, the railroad offered choices, and the weight of those choices pressed heavy. The next day brought work in unexpected forms. Merchants offered contracts, paychecks, and favors. Eli was tempted, the chance to earn faster, to secure a way home. But he also saw greed and desperation in the newcomer's eyes. Some men would take advantage of the railroad's promise, trampling others without thought. Dust Creek had survived storms and outlaws, but could it withstand human ambition? That night, the town celebrated cautiously. Lanterns glowed along the streets, music floated from the saloon, and the smell of cooking fires filled the air. Eli sipped water from a tin cup, thinking of the letter from Mary folded in his coat. The railroad was a lifeline, a way to reach home sooner, but it also threatened the simplicity he cherished. Balance would be required. Mason joined him by the fire. You planning to leave soon? He asked, eyes reflecting the flickering flames. Eli hesitated. I want to, but there's still work here. Obligations. Dust Creek helped me survive. Can't abandon it entirely. Mason nodded. Then you're like the train, carrying both burden and promise. The comparison made Eli smile faintly, though worry lingered. By dawn, Eli had decided. He would continue to work, help Dust Creek rebuild, and prepare for the journey home. The railroad would take him west, faster than any horse could, but only when the time was right. Each day spent in Dust Creek was a step toward Missouri, each choice a test of patience, courage, and integrity. The tracks glimmered in the morning sun, stretching into the horizon, a symbol of possibilities both perilous and promising. Eli Carter understood that life on the frontier had changed irreversibly, that progress came with risk, and that survival now meant adapting to a new world without losing himself. As he returned to his cabin, the hum of the town reminded him that Dust Creek would endure, and so would he. Somewhere between labor and longing, between rails and horizon, Eli could sense the bridge to his family waiting. The railroad had arrived, and with it, a choice, to move forward, to change, or to wait for the moment when he could finally go home. The morning was crisp, and the air carried a sense of decision. Dust Creek shimmered under pale sunlight, the railroad stretching like a silver ribbon into the distance. Eli stood at the edge of town, boots resting on the dry earth, heart heavy with the knowledge that today, he must choose the path that would define his future, either stay or finally return home. He thought of Mary, of the letter still worn soft by repeated reading. Her words had guided him through storms, gunfights, and long nights of doubt. Every mile of dust and labor had been a step toward her. Yet the frontier had shaped him, tested his resolve, and demanded sacrifices that could never be undone. He could not forget the lives he had touched here. The town called to him, small gestures pulling at his conscience. Mason was already on his feet, working with the foreman to repair the saloon roof. Children played among the rubble, their laughter mingling with hammering and saws. Dust Creek had endured, and Eli felt a tug, responsibility to see the town thrive, to honor the people who had trusted him. Yet Missouri waited, miles of prairie and river separating him from warmth and family. His son's face appeared vividly in his mind, eyes wide with curiosity, eager to share stories and learn letters he had traced with such pride. The thought of holding Mary again, of stepping into the embrace he had long imagined, filled him with a longing so intense it was almost painful. Eli walked slowly toward the railroad, hand brushing the cold steel of the rails. Steam hissed from the locomotive in the distance, a reminder that travel was now faster, life more urgent. With every step, he weighed the pull of home against the ties of the frontier. Dust Creek had given him purpose and survival. Missouri offered love, family, and a chance to reclaim the man he had been before hardship. Mason fell into step beside him. "Thinking of leaving?" he asked quietly. Eli nodded. "Yes, but I can't ignore what this place has done for me. The town, the people. I owe them." Mason studied him, nodding slowly. "Maybe that's why you'll go home. You'll take what you've learned and carry it forward, not leave it behind." The sun climbed higher, casting sharp shadows over broken streets and repaired buildings. Eli considered his revolver, still sitting in the cabin, a reminder of the violence he had survived and the moral choices he had made. Could he leave it behind, along with Dust Creek? Or would memories of blood and storms follow him across the plains? He remembered the letter, her words echoing in his mind. "I believe you'll come home before next winter. I just know it." The certainty in her tone was a compass he could not ignore. Eli closed his eyes, imagining the journey, endless miles, the wind in his hair, the sun warming his back as he approached the small farmhouse where family waited patiently, their lives untouched by frontier chaos. He turned back toward the town one last time, taking in the familiar sights. The repaired barn, the saloon with its doors swinging open, Mason helping a child tie a bootlace. Dust Creek had survived storms, outlaws, and the iron of the railroad. It was strong, resilient, and would continue without him. The frontier would endure as it always had. The whistle of the train echoed from the distance, calling him forward. Eli took a deep breath, weighing the choices, feeling the pull of home stronger than the call of survival in Dust Creek. Every step toward the locomotive felt like a step toward release, toward fulfilling the promise he had carried for years. The promise to Mary, to his son, and to himself. Mason clasped his shoulder, eyes conveying unspoken understanding. "Go, you've earned it. They'll manage here." Eli nodded, gratitude welling in him. He lifted his satchel, the letter tucked safely inside, and began walking toward the train. With each step, the weight of the frontier fell away, replaced by anticipation, hope, and the certainty of reunion. The townsfolk watched silently, some cheering quietly, others waving. Eli felt pride and sadness mingled in the pit of his stomach. He had lived, endured, and grown here. The lessons, the struggles, and the bonds would stay with him forever, etched in memory like the tracks stretching endlessly into the horizon. As he boarded the train, Eli looked back one final time. Dust Creek lay quiet but alive, the town he had defended, nurtured, and witnessed. He whispered softly, "Farewell, my friends. Keep each other safe." The wheels turned, steam hissed, and the locomotive began its journey. Dust Creek faded behind him, but the lessons and courage it had given him traveled forward. Through the window, he saw the first hills of Missouri rising in the distance, golden light spilling across fields and rivers. Eli felt his chest expand with hope and relief. Home awaited. His promise was within reach. The frontier had tested him, shaped him, and now it was time to carry that strength to the life he had longed for, and finally, to the family who had never stopped believing. The train surged forward, and Eli Carter allowed himself a rare smile. He was leaving the West, but he carried it with him, every storm, every gunfight, every hard-earned lesson. Dust Creek, the railroad, and the people he had come to love were part of him, etched forever into the fabric of his being. And beyond the horizon, Missouri awaited, bright and certain, ready to welcome him home. The train slowed as it neared Missouri, the familiar rolling fields stretching out like a promise. Eli pressed his forehead to the cool glass, feeling the sun warming the land ahead. Every mile erased the dust, blood, and storms of the West, replacing them with the gentle hum of home, the green of pastures, and the thought of Mary waiting for him. He stepped onto the platform, boots crunching against the packed earth, and felt an unfamiliar stillness. No outlaws, no storms, no deadlines, just quiet and the scent of damp soil and early morning dew. The familiar sounds of the countryside welcomed him, birds chirping, cattle lowing, and the wind stirring the trees in a rhythm he remembered from childhood. Eli carried his satchel, the letter from Mary folded carefully on top. He walked down the familiar dirt road, each step measured, savoring the return. Houses rose on either side, small gardens and fences, simple life untouched by the chaos he had survived. And then, at the end of the lane, he saw her. Mary, standing in the doorway of their farmhouse, hair catching the sunlight, eyes wide with hope. She ran to him before he could call her name. Her arms wrapped around his neck, and he held her tightly, feeling the years of separation melt away. The scent of home, of hearth and familiarity, filled his lungs. Eli closed his eyes, letting the moment sink in. The frontier, the storms, the choices, all fading behind this singular, perfect reunion. Their son appeared beside Mary, eyes shining with disbelief and joy. "Papa," he cried, running into Eli's embrace. Eli laughed, tears streaming down his face as he lifted the boy high, spinning him in a circle. Every hardship, every mile of Dust Creek, every storm and gunfight, suddenly made sense. They had all led to this moment, to the warmth of family and the certainty of love. Mary pulled back slightly, hands on his shoulders, searching his face. "You made it," she whispered. Eli nodded, voice thick with emotion. "I promised," he said simply, and it was enough. The years of struggle, the frontier's lessons, and the bloodshed for survival all converged into the quiet power of keeping a promise. The farmhouse seemed smaller than he remembered, yet fuller, alive with the presence of his family. Eli set down his satchel and took a deep breath, inhaling the smell of fresh bread, the fields, and the life waiting for him. The sun rose higher, casting light over the house, the garden, and the wide open skies, golden and serene. He knelt beside his son, tracing the lines of his face with rough hands softened by love. "You've grown so much," Eli said, voice tender. The boy grinned, hugging him again. Mary watched, a smile breaking over her face, pride and relief mingled in her eyes. The frontier, the West, the storms, none of it mattered now. Only this. Eli's thoughts drifted briefly to Dust Creek, to Mason, the townsfolk, and the railroad. They had survived, endured, and thrived. And now, their stories and his experiences were part of him, etched permanently into his character, guiding him forward. He had carried the West in his heart, and now he brought it home. The morning stretched long and calm. Eli and his family stood together on the porch, watching the first true sunrise of his return. Fields glistened with dew, birds sang freely, and the horizon promised days of peace, growth, and family. The past would always be part of him, but this moment was his own, a reward for patience, courage, and steadfast love. Eli felt a quiet strength settle over him. No storm, no outlaw, no moral choice could undo the life he now held. The West had tested him, shaped him, and prepared him for this day. He breathed deeply, feeling the warmth of the sun, the earth, and the love around him. He was home, whole, and ready to embrace life fully. As the sun climbed higher, casting light across the fields and farmhouse, Eli Carter understood the full meaning of his journey. Survival was not only about enduring storms or battles, but about returning to those who mattered most, carrying the lessons learned, and finally living the life he had fought for. He held Mary's hand, then his son's, stepping onto the porch together. Dust Creek, the railroad, the frontier, and every challenge behind him were memories, guiding but no longer dictating his path. Ahead lay warmth, family, and the quiet certainty of home. The last sunrise over the West faded, replaced by the enduring light of Missouri, and Eli had arrived. Eli stepped off the train, the platform creaking beneath his boots. The familiar scent of Missouri, damp earth, cornfields, and wood smoke filled his lungs. Years of Dust Creek, storms, and railroads fell away with each breath. His satchel felt lighter, though his heart carried every lesson, every scar, and every promise he had earned along the way. The dirt road to his home stretched before him, lined with fences and orchards that seemed untouched by time. Birds chirped as if heralding his return. For a moment, Eli hesitated, unsure if the woman and child he had imagined would still be waiting. Then, at the farmhouse porch, he saw Mary. She had not aged beyond her warmth, her eyes still holding the same quiet strength that had guided him for years. She ran to him, arms open, laughter spilling into the morning. "Eli!" she cried. He caught her in a long embrace, feeling the tension of decades evaporate. The small farmhouse seemed to absorb the years of separation, transforming into a sanctuary that had waited patiently. Eli breathed in her scent, and for the first time in years, the West felt distant, a chapter finally closed. Their son appeared, bounding across the yard, eyes wide with disbelief and joy. "Papa," he yelled, wrapping his small arms around Eli's legs. Eli laughed, lifting him high, spinning him as Mary watched with tears glistening. Every hardship, every gunfight, every storm endured in Dust Creek led to this: the warmth of home, a family reunited, and the promise of peace finally realized. Inside, the cabin felt alive with smells of cooking and comfort. Mary had prepared breakfast, as she always did, but now it tasted of reunion, each bite infused with relief and love. Eli traced the edges of her hands, worn yet steady, as if to memorize every line. "I promised," he said quietly. "And I kept it." Mary's eyes softened, the strength in them matching his own. Eli sat at the table with his family, savoring each moment, each laugh and story. He told them of Dust Creek, of the railroad, and of the storm, though gently, so as not to burden them with the weight of his trials. Mason and the townsfolk of Dust Creek were never far from his mind. He had promised to carry their stories and lessons into this new chapter of life. The days passed slowly, each one a quiet blessing. Eli helped in the fields, repaired fences, and walked the surrounding woods. Every sunrise reminded him that life could continue without the violence and chaos of the frontier. Yet, in moments of stillness, memories of Dust Creek, the gunfights, the storms, and the choices made, surfaced, a testament to endurance and courage. One afternoon, a letter arrived for Eli, bearing Mason's familiar scrawl. Dust Creek was thriving, rebuilt stronger and more united. The railroad had brought opportunity and danger, but the town endured. Mason wrote of new families, children, and the memory of the day Eli had stood between life and death, shaping the town's destiny. Eli smiled, his heart warmed by this connection between past and present. As autumn approached, Eli walked with his son through the orchard. Leaves fell in gold and amber, carrying the wind's whisper. "Tell me about the West, Papa," the boy asked, eyes wide with curiosity. Eli knelt, brushing leaves from his coat. "It was hard," he began, "but it taught me what's most important: courage, patience, and keeping promises. The land tests you, but the lessons stay with you forever." Mary joined them, resting her hand on Eli's shoulder. "You brought so much back with you," she said softly. Eli nodded. "Every choice I made there, every storm I survived, led me here. Dust Creek, the outlaws, the railroads, they shaped me. And now, I can carry that strength to you, to our son, and to the life we build together." Evenings were spent by the hearth, Eli recounting tales of the frontier with care. He spoke of Dust Creek's resilience, Mason's loyalty, and the unpredictable power of the railroad. Each story carried not only adventure, but lessons of morality, courage, and humanity. His son listened, absorbing wisdom alongside wonder, learning that survival was as much about integrity as it was about strength. Winter approached, bringing snow that blanketed the fields in white silence. Eli and Mary worked side by side, repairing roofs, tending the animals, and ensuring their home was ready for the season. The boy played nearby, laughter echoing through the farm, a stark contrast to the chaos Eli had endured in the West. Each night, Eli tucked his son in, whispering promises of love and guidance. One snowy morning, Eli found himself standing at the edge of the orchard, looking toward the horizon. He thought of Dust Creek, Mason, and the railroad, remembering the choices and sacrifices that had brought him here. The frontier had tested him, pushed him to his limits, and ultimately prepared him for the life he now cherished. Strength and love, he realized, could coexist. He wrote letters to Mason and the townsfolk, updating them on life at home. He described the farm, Mary's laughter, and his son's growth. The letters carried warmth and encouragement, a reminder that even across miles, bonds forged in hardship endure. Dust Creek had survived, Eli had survived, and now, home was a promise kept, a life fully reclaimed. Spring returned, painting the fields green and vibrant. Eli worked tirelessly, building new fences, planting crops, and preparing for the harvest. His son helped eagerly, learning responsibility and patience. Mary tended the garden, her hands steady and strong. Together, they created a rhythm of life rooted in love, family, and the lessons of endurance Eli had carried from the West. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Eli stood with his family on the porch. The sky glowed with gold and crimson, reflecting in his eyes. "This is what I fought for," he whispered to Mary. She squeezed his hand, understanding fully. "And you've earned it," she replied. Their son clung to them, the warmth of 3 lives intertwined, safe and whole at last. Eli reflected on the frontier, Dust Creek, and the choices he had made. He realized that survival was not merely escaping danger, but facing it with integrity, courage, and care for others. Every storm, every gunfight, and every moral decision had shaped him, preparing him for this moment of peace and fulfillment. The night fell over Missouri, soft and quiet. Stars twinkled above the farm, reflecting in the boy's eyes as he slept. Eli and Mary sat together, holding hands, sharing silence. The West was behind them, but its lessons endured, woven into Eli's heart. He had returned not just to a home, but to a life enriched by experience, courage, and love. As dawn approached, Eli watched the sun rise over the fields, golden light spilling across the landscape. He felt a deep contentment, a sense of completion. The frontier had tested him, the railroad had challenged him, and Dust Creek had prepared him. But here, with his family, Eli found the ultimate reward: the peace, security, and joy that comes from keeping a promise and returning home. Eli Carter breathed in the morning air, savoring the warmth, the life, and the love that surrounded him. He understood that the West would always be a part of him, its storms, challenges, and lessons carried in his heart. But Missouri was his anchor, his reward, and the place where he could finally rest, grow, and build a legacy for his son, for Mary, and for himself. The farm was alive with movement, laughter, and hope. Eli walked through the fields, watching his son play, feeling Mary beside him. Every decision, every risk, every day in Dust Creek had led to this. The horizon was vast and welcoming, and Eli Carter, survivor of storms and the frontier, was finally home.